Hey, how's it going, everyone? Scartafist here. We're back with another game recap. This time, the Toronto Raptors against the Utah Jazz on the second night of a back-to-back 9 p.m. Eastern Time, March 9th. Now, I was going to do the Sacramento game that happened prior, but I decided against it just because I didn't have enough notes that I thought were good enough for that particular game. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a couple of mentions from the Sacramento game when I'm doing this recap because there were a lot of similarities that I just wanted to point out or things that I would have addressed had I decided to do the Sacramento game. With that said, though, let's get started into this one. Like I said, just to open things up, this was the second night of a back-to-back, so you really were hoping that Toronto could buckle down and go to their bench. Now, there was a huge problem in the Sacramento game with Toronto's bench. They had scored 7 points, and Sacramento's bench had poured down 45. And Toronto, keep in mind, barely edged out the Kings. And I would argue that it would have gone to OT had Luke Walton decided to put in Buddy Hield on that final play for a three that ended up being an air ball by, I think it was Bielitsa or Bogdanovich. They had combined for 1 of 12 or 1 of 13 at that point when Luke Walton decided to shoot that three coming out of the timeout. Now, when I saw this game, I got extremely worried after minute 1 because, boom, you lose OG and you lose Norman. OG would happen to come back and make a bit of a contribution later on in the game. He just had to slot in back a contact, but Norm out with a left ankle sprain. You know, the guy cannot seem to catch a break. He was fire in Sacramento. He really kept Toronto in the game, and he, along with Lowry, had an amazing performance to kind of carry the offensive load. You lose Norm here, so what's going to happen? In my head, I'm like, well, Toronto's just going to get outscored because they had to rely on three-point shooting and a bad call by Luke Walton to really kind of, seal up the game against the Kings. But instead here, you start to see, especially after Norm goes out, the Jazz try to capitalize by raining threes down and getting a dribble drive penetration. Now, for this particular game, what I did notice overall, as I pull up the rest of my notes, is that the Jazz had a lot more trouble getting into the paint than I thought they would. You have Rudy Gobert, who kind of is limited offensively. He can seem to only score with lobs, and no one else is really trying to go down there, right? You got some players like Tony Bradley or Royce O'Neal, who I thought were really good for the Utah Jazz. In fact, the bench for the Utah Jazz completely was really keeping the entire team afloat up, for the whole game at that point. The starters for the Utah Jazz didn't bring in. They had trouble containing Siakam and Ibaka, who, in Sacramento had some questionable three-point attempts. He had good looks, but he wasn't making them. This game, he was making them. So, yeah, let's go by a quarter-by-quarter analysis. And as I do that, I should probably open this right now. God damn. All right, so yeah, Norm gets injured, like I was saying. Mike Conley, I'm looking at Mike Conley, and he's really fallen off. He's the sixth man at this point, and let's hope he can excel at his role. If I'm the Utah Jazz, I feel very kind of just like, shit, their biggest acquisition in this offseason was getting Mike Conley Jr., and he just, I don't know what's happened to him, father time, whatever. He's relying way too much on that floater to get any offense going, and maybe the occasional three here and there. He was, overall good this game in his role, but, you're the Utah Jazz. You pay this guy quite a hefty salary to be the starting point guard, and over, you're not even 8 months into the season, or not even a full year into your new team, and you have to be benched because you just cannot be the same as you once were in Memphis, leading the offense. The bench points for Toronto, like I said earlier, big problem. Gasol and Fred are out tonight, so that kind of adds on to the concern that I have for the Toronto Raptors going into this game, right? Keep in mind, Utah's also won 5 in a row. That first quarter seems to go back and forth a little bit. Things are kind of like even, but Siakam does pick up his second offensive foul towards the 3-minute mark to end the first quarter. So I'm a little bit worried. He's got to play a little bit less aggressive. And yeah, Utah also starts to force a little bit more turnovers to close off the first quarter. And you keep in mind, Utah's not a team that is known for forcing turnovers. And Toronto is a team that's known for forcing turnovers and, keeping the ball relatively safe. But I see this turnover madness, and I'm just thinking, what is going on? Are Toronto going to drop this? Because they didn't play that well in Sacramento, contrary, like, as a team, right? They played well enough to win the game, but there were so many opportunities in the previous Sacramento game that they could have just taken a huge lead, and it just didn't happen. So we go into the second quarter. Toronto has trouble, opening up the second quarter, at least in a scoring perspective, just because the offensive players are so limited, right? Nick Nurse is forced to rely on the bench, and he's got to slot in McCaw this game, and McCaw gets a lot of shit, but this game I would say he was good because that defense, him interrupting the passing lanes, forcing turnovers, that's what kind of really stopped the Jazz later when they tried to go on a run or piece together any momentum. But yeah, Terrence Davis, we thought you could rely, Nick Nurse thought he could rely on him this road trip. He's had a shaky road trip, I'm not gonna lie. That Golden State game was probably his best. He's kind of a player that can sort of create his own shot, but at the same time, once he's got multiple, starters trying to guard him, double team him, or even just like getting, defensively pressured by better players, you start to see a little bit of the rookie status come in. He's not making too many bad decisions. It's just his game is a little bit limited right now, and he really needs a playmaker with him to kind of excel. And that's what Fred was before he kind of just got upgraded into this pseudo starting / interchangeable 6-man role. I don't really know exactly how Nick Nurse's lineup is working right now. It's just you guys know I've never been a fan of that double guard lineup with Lowry and Fred, even when they were shooting the lights out. But hey, listen, the bench has definitely suffered from a lack of a playmaker, and I bring this up later on too, and I have it in my fourth quarter notes. I would really like to see Fred take charge of that bench unit along with Ibaka. Get some veteran leadership, get some playmaking, and get some scoring in there. Because right now they don't have enough experienced guys. I'd probably put Norm into the starting lineup at this point because he's just playing out of his mind. All right, so to continue on with the second quarter, Lowry and Matt Thomas start working a little bit of a two-man game to get some open looks to create some offense, and this seems to work, but it's more of Utah is missing just wide open threes for no particular reason, and these aren't corner threes, which Toronto is used to, giving up. These are just like transition threes, almost like close to top of the key threes. The Utah is just, there's a lid on the basket, so to speak, and that's really allowing Toronto to kind of get away with this shoddy defense that they played in the second quarter, right? But Toronto's bench does start to pick it up after, halfway through the second quarter. They start to get some buckets. They start to actually attack the paint. And at this point, you got to notice that if you're the Utah Jazz, Rudy Gobert needs to get more involved. And Rudy Gobert this entire, yesterday night was just awful. He was completely awful. He really couldn't get engaged. He wasn't a physical presence. He let Ibaka drop 27 on him. I understand that Ibaka is mobile, but goddamn, Rudy, you gotta make that up in rebounds or point contribution. It wasn't good for Rudy Gobert, right? But like we saw in the Sacramento game, there's a huge reason why the bench has struggled is due to the lack of the playmaker. I'm going to go through that. I already went through that, I should say. Raptors are not settling for threes. They're going hard to the paint, like I probably, mentioned earlier. Pascal, he ends up picking up his third foul. Not very good. And, we go into the second quarter with things kind of tied up. Utah really had an opportunity to basically beat the brakes off Toronto in that second quarter and create some sizable distance. We actually go into the half with Toronto up a couple points. And, at this point, I'm thinking, okay, if they can grind it out and if Utah continues to have this poor shooting night, Toronto's going to come in with a win. So we go to the third quarter, and I'm like, okay, I think I don't want to doubt the Raptors at this point, but I know Nick Nurse has got to give these starters some rest and basically concede some offensive momentum going into the third. So in my head, I'm thinking, okay, he's going to play the bench for the third and see if they can maintain that point differential of, the lead of 6 points or whatever. If they can do that, put the starters back in, because Toronto starters have played better at this point, Toronto has a very good chance to win this game, right? McCaw starts the third to be with Lowry. Rudy Gobert, he's got to defend. I don't know. Rudy Gobert, I'm not going to defend his performance, but he had some questionable foul calls overall. There's great defense by O'Neal on Siakam. Toronto is just constantly attacking these mismatches to start off the third quarter. And, even though they don't have the full offensive firepower, I would have argued you rest Lowry and put in Terrence Davis, but I understand because the score is so close, you really just got to put in Lowry and try to mix and match Terrence Davis a little bit later into the third, which I think doesn't even end up happening because I don't think TD played at all after that, or if he did, it was just small spurts, right? The one player I was afraid of, when I'm watching the Toronto Raptors is Joe Ingles, because That guy is a marksman, a sniper. He can really get it going, and you saw that happen in the fourth quarter, right? But yeah, towards the end of the third quarter, Utah continues to force these turnovers, but the problem is they can't seem to buy a bucket. Like there was one particular play where Jordan Clarkson, I think I don't know if it was the third or fourth quarter, right? But Jordan Clarkson manages to get a turnover, and he has an open basket. Siakam literally is just his presence alone manages to get Jordan Clarkson to kind of miss the layup, and it rolls out off the rim, and it's just like wow. Like Utah cannot score on transition. You had another one where Mike Conley, I think, ends up getting a steal, and it's a 2-on-1, and he just waits because like he's just not confident taking it up or passing. It's just, yeah, Utah's transition offense tonight was really, really bad. They picked it up in the fourth quarter, but you had to have done that a little bit more in the other quarters. So at the point halfway through the third quarter, I think the announcers both note that both the TNT and the Raptor broadcast, or was it ESPN? One of the two, right? Gobert only has 2 points, 3 rebounds, and 3 fouls, and he's actually getting visibly frustrated at this point. He's being held the whole night as well. Toronto's getting away with a lot of just like quick holds or just to kind of edge him out, and he's getting very, very angry. He gets called for a couple fouls, and I'm just like, yo, Rudy, you might want to like settle down here, because if you get taken out of the game in the fourth quarter, Toronto is going to abuse driving in, because Ibaka, they got to respect him from 3 tonight, so he's able to get some fake outs. If Rudy's gone, holy shit, Ibaka, everybody's going to just take it to the rim. You have no offensive rebounding. At this point, you have allowed Rondae Hollis-Jefferson to kill you on the glass, even with Gobert in the game, Tony Bradley, and Royce O'Neal, right? Like, I thought, I'll put it like this, I thought Toronto had problems rebounding. Tonight, or last night, I should say, Utah had some serious problems on the glass. Every time Toronto's missing a shot, I see so many like red shirts just like going up for that rebound. One yellow shirt, Gobert. And if it's on Toronto's end, it's the same thing. Gobert is the only one that's trying to even be in position for these rebounds or second chance opportunities. He's just getting boxed out or somewhat held down from time to time, right? Rebounding was not a strong suit for Utah. So yeah, Utah, they had 0 points off of the Raptors' 11 turnovers at one point. That just goes to, it could have been at the very least 22 points. This game's a completely different story. Snyder decides to put the bench in eventually, and they immediately start to attack the paint, and they do a pretty good job. You got Tony Bradley coming in, providing some size, and he's able to get a couple of buckets in there, and Utah, starts to put together some offensive momentum. At this point, that the starters are doing awful for Utah. Donovan Mitchell was just straight up jacking bricks tonight. He was very quiet. In fact, I think if Gobert hadn't played this game, Donovan Mitchell would be getting a lot more scrutiny, because he's got to take over. He's got to be the offensive threat. He wasn't that night. He got clamped down pretty much by Toronto's defense. But yeah. So we go into the fourth quarter, and at this point, you start to see that the rebounding still is going in Rondae Hollis-Jefferson's favor. Utah, to their credit, does get to piece together a couple of threes from Joe Ingles. He starts to light up, and at one point, the game is tied, and then, but this only happens after a timeout by Quinn Snyder. At the 11-minute mark, this is after Toronto manages to get 2 quick transition field goals off of Utah's just sloppy ball handling and defense. And after that run from Utah does go, and then Nick Nurse calls a timeout again. I do like the fact that both these coaches have quick triggers when it comes to calling the timeout. They see something like, call it immediately. Call it fucking immediately. Do not let the bleeding happen, right? Don't let the bleeding get to a point where you have a serious problem. Nip it in the bud, so to speak. But overall, I'm noticing the actual energy of Utah up until like late into the fourth quarter, it was pretty high. It's just they just couldn't get shit to go. Like a lot of buckets that should have been going in, they just didn't they didn't go. And when you don't score, it's hard to win games, guys. It's hard to win games. But yeah, back-to-back threes by Udas causes Nurse to call the timeout. Schneider also went to a zone defense that really helped spur on this comeback by Utah. It fell a little bit short towards the end because you have this oh god, OG Anunoby blocks Rudy Gobert. They both get ejected, and then Toronto closes Utah out like a championship team. Lowry also hits a major deep 3 when the score is like 95, 93-ish, and that really, really kind of just, at that point, Toronto still got a little bit of offensive firepower, because for 3 minutes, Toronto wasn't getting anything to go, and Utah was making a serious comeback. But yeah, that's pretty much all. I think Ibaka, it was a 15-3 run by Utah at one point. One point, you start to wonder if Ibaka's injured. He's not. I'm just going to, zoom on ahead. After 2:30 minutes in the game where Lowry hits that crazy 3, you have the moment where And this happens after the ejection too, right? Siakam, the ball is inbounded to Siakam. Siakam tosses it towards McCaw. Matt Thomas is literally right below the basket. Double team hasn't fully gotten to McCaw. McCaw just gives up the ball. Not a good show, and that's what kind of leads to a block by OG to kind of stop this. I think, yeah, that was the block by OG, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, that could have been a costly turnover. Overall, though, McCaw was good. The team really, really, really did a good job this game. Great performance by Toronto. You could argue it's more of the Utah Jazz, just like, what were you guys doing in terms of not scoring on transition? But at the same time, Toronto did a good job and just forcing these misses just due to presence as well as rebounding. If there's one thing you want to take away from this game is Toronto showed up for rebounding when you didn't have Gasol. Ibaka was basically a perimeter shooter or a slasher this game. You really only had Rondae Hollis-Jefferson on the offensive glass, and he almost out-rebounded Utah. Like, there were multiple times where I'm just saying, damn, Rondae Hollis-Jefferson is going ape shit right now. And yeah, that the game ends with 101-92. Great win for Toronto too. I keep saying this because, they have not been playing well for the most part. I thought this victory was more impressive than Sacramento just because you're down Norm. You've got to find a way to win the game. And yeah, they close off the road trip 4-1, and they're in firm control of the second seed. Boston had a really good chance to, catch up. Milwaukee's dropping, but, they're resting their players. Expect Toronto to hold the second seed going into the playoffs, and we can see what they can really do this year. But yeah, great game overall. That's all I got, guys. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you next time.